In the meantime, Vitaly has joined us. So good to have you here. See you virtually, good old friend. Vitaly was a speaker at TEDx San Francisco in 2015. We've met before. He supported the program with connections, hosted meetings, um, all of them very powerful. I love following his Facebook and social comments, ideas, observations in a very provocative way. He is definitely a person who sees the world from a skeptical eye, educated with a lot of experience and insights from traveling, meeting a lot of people, entrepreneurs, and on and forth.
Thanks, Nikki. I appreciate it. So I'll give you a little bit of my background to give you context, I suppose. I'm not sure how much you know about me, but I was born in Ukraine, grew up in Cupertino, California. My family immigrated when I was 8 years old, and I'm a Silicon Valley, 1.5 generation person here. Never really fit in, and certainly wouldn't fit in Ukraine these days either. So I've always had a little bit of an objective perspective, so to say. I got started in the startup world quite a young age, at about 13, as an intern at a company that was called Paragraph. Then they came from Russia, that later sold to Silicon Graphics. Way back when, a lot of that team became Evernote. So that's probably a better known company as a subsequent child of that company. And by the time I was an undergrad in college, I was running a design team. I was a self-taught designer. I was the youngest employee of Kinko's when I was a teenager. I got involved in dot-coms, an enterprise software company that I grew with, was employee something like 19 and went to 150. And then during the dot bomb, went back to the last 10 people in the company. And then also got laid off. And then after that, I had a series of 3 companies over 16 years, both in services, graphic arts related, and then a venture-backed SaaS company called Keen. We were the first e-commerce platform that was software as a service for the graphic arts industry. Sold that company in 2015. Through that process, got to know a little company called HP. HP then asked me to join after it split into 2 companies, HP Inc. and Hewlett Packard Enterprise, to help launch the corporate venture arm there. So I spent a couple of years at HP, launched the corporate venture arm, made some investments into funds, made some direct investments, and it was a really interesting experience. It was the first time in my career in a large company, and doesn't get much larger than that these days in HP. And it was an interesting bureaucracy, different speed of thinking, different decision process. And then I left a couple of years ago and started a boutique investment bank called GS Capital. That's what I run now. What we do is M&A, capital raise, and strategic advisory for both startups and for enterprises. And I happen to focus these days a lot in the transportation and mobility sector. That is, EV and autonomy on the ground, on water, in the air, from every direction. So some of my clients are Hyperloop, Transportation Technologies, Fisker, Byton, Damon Motorcycles, really hot company in Canada that's doing a smart electric motorcycle, and a few others. I also have done a lot of work in AI sector, AI enterprise. So applying that to automation, I have some thoughts I'll share with you on kind of where we're headed there and how important AI is, and how important it's being treated here as well. And as well as some medical and healthcare related technologies and startups, as well as material science and 3D printing. So got pretty wide grasp there. For the last decade, I've mentored with about a dozen accelerators worldwide. For a brief time years ago, I even taught pitch training at 500 startups that I'm sure you've heard of. And 2017, I published a book called Accelerated Startup, which is a bit of a manual for founders, especially first-time founders, and it's being utilized by several accelerators and business schools as a textbook now. We're actually in the midst of translating it. It's going to be coming out in Ukrainian and in Ukraine, a little bit later in Russian and Russia, and probably other places. So that's probably a good overview about my background. If you want to learn more, You can go to my website, golomb.net. There's everything that I do there. I'm also about to launch a podcast, which is also really hands-on and practical for entrepreneurs, primarily, of kind of how to do certain things. And that is going to turn into a full-blown online school eventually. So more news on that. We're building that now. So that's a little bit about my busy life. Nikki, tell me where you want me to go with the discussion.
So yeah, I'm unmuted. So there's two ways of going. One is we share a little about your book is about reaching first 10,000 customers.
In part, yeah.
Journey. But I'd also invite you to keep this an open conversation. Things you'd like to know, things you'd like to ask, things you'd like to play against Vitaly's opinion. If there's anything popping up right now, that would be a good chance to post a thought, post a question, start the conversation.
Let me do this. Let me give you a couple of thoughts while everybody's thinking of maybe questions to talk through. I'll give you a couple of things that I consider high priority and that I think are useful for those kind of trying to learn about Silicon Valley and understand how this beast works. First and foremost, Silicon Valley is a special place because we've had, let's say, if every decade is a generation in entrepreneurship, we've had about 7 of those here. So what makes Silicon Valley special is not necessarily the capital that's here, but the generations of institutional knowledge of how to build enterprises, build fast-growing enterprises that that didn't exist before, right? So startups are something by definition should be something that nobody's ever done before, right? And that's if it's something novel, if you're using technology that wasn't possible a year ago to solve a particular problem, it allows you that disruptive scale, right? Because you can collapse a market, you can do something 10 times faster, better, cheaper, which allows you to take over a market or build a new one where one didn't exist before. That's what a startup is. That's, so the word start and startup oftentimes gets, it's a misnomer, right? Just because you started a new business doesn't make it a technology startup. So I take kind of a more narrow definition of what a startup is. Whereas a traditional business, you might have a manual of exactly what to do, right? If you're starting a franchise or a service business or a hotel business or a restaurant business, whatever it may be, there is a particular way of doing it that has been done many times before. And if you follow the step 1 through 127, you are bound to be successful, right? Let's say. With startups, by definition, it has to be something nobody's ever done before. So that's a major element. And here in Bay Area, we have a lot of people that have experience doing this, going from zero to hero with these ideas. And the reason that a lot of startups come here is, yes, there's capital, but if you're building something truly global and you want to be the best in the world in a particular technology that's widely applicable, you go to the Olympics. And the main resource here is experienced managers. So when you're going from 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people very quickly, you need that connective tissue of experienced managers that have done this before in these type of companies, and they only exist in abundance here, right? In New York, you may have a few hundred. In London, you may have, 100 people that are managers that have done these things. In Bay Area, you probably have 50, 60, 70,000 director level managers that have gone through this journey. So that's what makes it really special. Certainly the capital is a little bit different as well. Investors here understand that they're not investing in a traditional business where they're trying to over-engineer to get the dividends out of a business, but it's really kind of a lottery. They know that they're going either for 10, 20, 100, 1,000x their money, or it's going to go to zero. And the decisions are a lot faster, and they do this based on kind of building a filter of seeing many, many deals. So when I was at HP in 2 years, I probably looked at about 1,000 different deals, right? Literally 1,000 different deals, which gives you a completely different level of understanding and filter mechanism to kind of be able to recognize what works, what doesn't. So that's a really important thing to think about as far as when you're trying to get into that Silicon Valley mindset. This is not about over optimizing and going for kind of a Mittelstand dream where you want to build the company that's the best at this one widget and will only get to ever 20 or 30 employees. That's not a Silicon Valley venture scalable business. You're talking about companies that have something unique about them, usually technology leverage, to take over an industry and grow to thousands of employees and hundreds of millions in revenue within a few years. That's really what the game is about here. That's very important. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit on AI as a topic, because if you look at the last several decades, we've gone through several eras of technology, right? In the late 70s through like mid 80s, we went through the revolution of desktop computing, where computers became much more common at home, and everything was getting computerized. On the business side, you went to software to solve a lot of problems. So right, that allowed you to kind of disrupt the old way of doing things. The next wave was internet, everything getting connected, and now you're doing everything online. And that gave birth to the mobile era, and where everything became a lot more compact and on the run and always prevalent. So then the question is, okay, what's the next era? The mobile era is pretty much settled. For you to launch an app today and be successful with it is going to require, more than anything, a tremendous advertising and user acquisition budget. So that means that all the white space has been more or less filled with the mobile era. We have to look at what's next. And my thesis is what's next is the AI era, meaning you're applying AI to automate certain things and solve problems in yet a different way. So you're starting to see that across the board. AI is not a technology, AI is an era, and it can be applied to just about everything. We are halfway through the fourth industrial revolution, depending on how you count. And in 10 years, the world is going to look very, very different than it does now. So on the one hand, from the venture perspective, that's exciting, that creates new opportunities, just like, let's say, in 2010, 2009, we had this breadth of new opportunity based on mobile being newly available. Now we have machine learning creating new possibilities yet again. On the other hand, the projection is that within the next 10 years, something like 30% of jobs will be automated away, and maybe 10% of them will be replaced, or 13%, if you want to be accurate, will be replaced with new roles that economists like to talk about. But there will be mass unemployment, and we're getting a sneak preview of this now with COVID. So that's something that we need to deal with collectively. As a big negative, because what it'll do is it'll create people that are non-essential to the economy, to use the current term, which will be a large swath of people, and we're going to have a much bigger gap growing between the haves and have-nots. And the educational system, which is a big interest becoming of mine, is really not prepared for educating people for them to have careers in this new world. Right. So whereas 100 years ago, high school became a requirement in the U.S. due to the industrialization of U.S. in the pre-World War II era, I think yet again we're going through this where, let's say, 4-year college will become a requirement for somebody to be relevant to take care of their family in this next generation. So that's I'll give you some context for that, and happy to dive into any questions you might have about that, or any other things related.
Any questions from you guys? Anything you'd like to?
So yes, I have a question. I'm the one that you cannot see. Okay. So
Okay.
you just talk about this 4-year college. And so you're saying, let me see if I understand you well, that it would be like mandatory in terms of culturally mandatory. It's not like it's not a law. Mandatory for everybody at least to have this college, so then to make a living? Just to confirm what you just said.
Yes, I think
Okay.
practically speaking, it's going to be, let me kind of clarify what I mean. Practically speaking, it's already becoming evident that somebody who doesn't have a college education has much lower chance of success, and they're stuck doing things that are easy to automate, let's say, for the most part.
Okay,
You know,
I understand what. Okay, so my question is that, so there is this kind of trend, maybe not there, but that I have heard, which is the opposite. So I love what you just said, because it's like, let's just forget all the titles, let's forget all the degrees, let's just work about doing, let's just focus about doing. So I really like your opinion in that sense.
I would say it's not so much the accreditation and having the letters on your resume. It
Okay.
could be the equivalent knowledge, but what I'm saying is that the average person is going to need to study something a lot more complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basic science, basic math,
Perfect.
basic writing is not going to be enough to do something that's more valuable or cannot be automated away.
Perfect.
So whatever form of education that is, the best way to do it, you know, from a perspective of kind of macro, you know, how do we do policy, is to say that, you know, you extend that, let's say in the US, you have 12 years of education, you extend that another 4 years, and that becomes a requirement, and a person doesn't graduate officially until 22.
Okay.
Let's say that would be the approach.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I'm surprised that you say that something like 4 years of college would be a requirement rather than maybe just people should be educated better in the first place, and that probably you could pack everything everyone needs into, you know, X number of years, and some people are going to waste all their time partying or playing video games, and some people will take it seriously, and the ones who will take it seriously will succeed, and the ones who don't won't. And that's sort of, isn't that how it's always been and how it's always going to be? And you know, there are people who will teach themselves online, people who drop out of high school and learn how to code in their free time and end up successful.
Sure, there will be those outliers, and there will be the teal fellows. I don't know if that's still happening, but it sends the wrong message to the masses, I would say. There are certainly lots of talented people that don't need that structure. They can learn on their own. And, you know, I just have a bachelor's degree, and I didn't even have a real college experience because I worked full time while I even got my bachelor's degree. So I'm definitely one of those that you describe. But what I think, again, if you're looking from the practical standpoint, you know, 100 years ago, high school was not required. 100 years ago, high school was something for rich kids,
right?
That their parents were able to pay for, and let them study more. And then really you had the knowledge workers. That whole economy really started between World War I, World War II, where you started seeing people be a lot more specialized. I mean, first of all, the maturity, especially I can speak for American kids, an 18-year-old in America is not quite an adult yet. In Europe, it could be a little bit different, especially Eastern Europe, where I come from.
Yeah.
An 18-year-old, pardon my French, is a grown-ass man. But you know, there's that element. The most important thing, though, is that you know, 18-year-olds are not commercially viable, right? Even when forget about restaurant, you know, serving in restaurants and all of that, but retail sector in the US is the biggest employer. A lot of that's going to get automated away, not 100%, but a lot of it. That's going to disappear. Driving, not immediately, not like Elon Musk is selling BS, but in a few years, there will be a lot more autonomous driving, and it's going to start on the commercial side with trucking. It's already starting, whereas that's a major employer of people with, you know, that don't have beyond the high school. Sometimes they don't have a high school education, completed high school education. So I think, you know, the context is not the last 10 years, 20 years. The context is, you know, look back at 100 years, because the change we're going to see in the next decade is going to be very, very profound. I think, you know, looking at technology and looking from perspective of the companies that I get pitched and learn about every day, you know, extrapolating that to the next 10 years, you can see they're going to take out a huge chunk of the workforce. So that's why I emphasize it. I'm saying I'm using, you know, college, a 4-year college education as a proxy, but the point is really simple. The point is that current education system is not keeping up. I absolutely agree that even, you know, the current 12-year education system in the US and a little bit different in other places that needs to improve. But saying that is not enough, right? Saying that everything needs to improve while the statistics are showing that it's getting actually worse because governments are not investing, especially in the US. Sure, I would love for the US to take 10% of its military budget and just make college free for everybody. That would solve a lot more problems than a few more tanks and aircraft carriers. But practically speaking, is that going to happen? I doubt it. So we have to be practical and find the right proxy to where we nudge things in the right direction and not just talk about it for the next 10 years while the water is boiling the frog. Let's put it that way.
Vitaly, I would like to play conversation cards with you. So I'm saying future off, and you just respond in a minute or two, and everyone who feels some emotion with your answer can address that emotion after the conversation card. Is that cool for you?
Sure.
All right. Let's talk about future of intellectual property.
Future of intellectual property. I would say it's going to become, on the one hand, a lot more important. I think what humans are really special at is creativity and finding solutions to certain problems that are non-linear. And that's what intellectual property is. That's something that won't be automated by AI anytime soon. Right? That's a very complex problem. And that's what makes us human. On the other hand, I've been frustrated with, let's say, the patent process. I think there's going to be some renewal in there because it takes on average 3 or 4 years to get a patent, and technology moves a lot faster than that. And that process is now irrelevant for many companies, they find.
Future brands. Future of brands.
Sorry, say it again.
Future of brands.
Brands.
We have feedback somewhere. Did you hear that? The brands. Future of brands.
Future of brands. I think brands are becoming much more important. What we're seeing now, for example, is a flight to quality, right? So you're going to see big brands consolidate their gains, right? Now, let's say most of retail is shut down, and a lot of them are going to go out of business. All that's going to do is accelerate Amazon, for example, as a brand. It's a trusted brand, and they're going to do more and more. So I think brands are going to become much more important in the future.
Future of art.
Oh, that's interesting. I think, I think art, tastes are going to change and styles are going to change and evolve. But I think largely the way we enjoy art and what it gives us, obviously, is just, it's a human response. So I think that's going to stay pretty constant. Certainly, a lot more music is coming out these days that I no longer like or identify with. So that just tells me that I'm getting older.
I mean, it's kind of also add like AR and VR and all kind of technology that affects this.
Yeah, there's going to be different modes. I got experience a few years ago, actually. A really interesting VR installation where it was a collaboration between a VR company that does these kind of 3D walk around installations and an artist. And what they did is took her paintings and made them 3D. So you can actually go into kind of this virtual museum, but instead of just looking at something on a wall, you can interact with it and get inside the art. So, I mean, that's certainly a really different new experience.
Science, future of science.
I hope there is science in the future because what we're seeing right now is this anti-intellectual wave of people that are falsely equating, their opinions with empirical data and science. I hope we snap out of it. I think it's a matter of who we have leading the charge. If you catch my drift.
Have you heard any startups pitch anything to fix this?
Yeah, there's a company that we're working with right now that's using machine learning to catch fake news. How about that? So an amplification of that.
Won't buy it because they don't really care.
What's that?
Yeah.
Community.
Facebook profits anyway, so.
Future of community or role of community in the future versus soul fighters or however you'd like to space it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sense of community it's quite interesting, right? Because the world is getting smaller in a sense that I can tell you that well, usually people are friends with people primarily based on how close they live, right? Or if they work together. That's been kind of the classic approach. Now we have an opportunity to travel the world extensively. We have an opportunity to connect with people and stay in touch with them in ways that are engaging enough to where you feel kind of that closeness. You know, there's lots of criticism of social media and Facebook in particular, and they are definitely not without fault, and they need to clean up their act. But I can tell you from my personal experience, it's a great way for me to keep up with the friends that I have around the world. And without that, I would definitely miss it, right? So one of the key tests with startups is if you can talk to your early customers, and one of the key questions you would ask is, hey, if I took this away from you, would you miss it? I would certainly miss something like Facebook, where it allows me to stay in touch with friends around the world and kind of experience their life through this little lens until the next time I get to see them. And oftentimes it's like once a year or less that I get to physically be in the same room with these people.
You love Porsche and you hate Tesla. Future of mobility.
Okay.
Future mobility is interesting. I don't hate Tesla. I think it's a mediocre car. If you look at it, if you take off the brand and you look at the quality of the build and what they built, yeah, okay. So they're the kamikaze. They were definitely the first to get to market with battery electrics, and they made that mainstream more or less. That's great. But there's just a nauseating level of bullshit that emanates from that company that I don't appreciate. I'm a fan of Porsche because of what the company stands for, which is quality, consistency, performance, all those things. Anyway, so I'm a little bit more conservative in that sense, let's say, because I like things that don't break. I've had Italian cars that spend more time at the mechanic than in my garage. Beautiful things that don't work. I've settled on German cars that work well. But future mobility is going to be interesting. I think the concept of car ownership is going to change quite a bit. The second order effects are things like insurance, parking, all those things are going to be changed with it. You can see the effect that Uber and Lyft and other ride sharing companies after Uber made on urban dwellers. In the US, 16-year-olds are the first that are able to get a license. In the last decade, the percentage of 16-year-olds with driver licenses fell by 50%. And the reason for that is because they have other alternatives. It's not that they really want that car with the liability, the insurance, the upkeep, the cost of the car. They want to get somewhere, right? That's what they're really wanting to do. They want that freedom. And with that, you're going to see the next thing will be autonomous transport. So Waymo, Zoox, Uber itself, they're going to go for autonomy. They're going to get rid of drivers, which, by the way, is another demonstration of a whole group of people losing their ability to make a living. And it's not a small group anymore. But that's going to make it cheaper, even more accessible to people. Even they'll be able to move around faster. Certainly, the future is electric. The question is, if you really kind of double click on that, battery electrics are heavy because they have to carry the batteries with them. They're expensive. The battery is anywhere up to half the cost of the car, manufacturing the car. Whereas you have technologies like hydrogen fuel cell, where Toyota has gone all in on with the Mirai, which is their first vehicle, more of kind of a market test. But the idea is that the way hydrogen electrics work is that you take hydrogen that's easy to generate, and it's very light, and you're able to then, in the vehicle itself, generate electricity out of it instead of carrying a heavy lithium-ion battery. So you're going to see transition to more interesting EV storage, more dense storage technologies, which is going to bring down the costs. And then ultimately, I think relatively soon, we're going to hit an inflection point where EVs, for me, it's like, it doesn't make sense to buy an internal combustion car anymore, unless it's for the racetrack, where performance on EVs is not quite there yet. But But for normals, right, for normal transportation, if you're going to buy a car at all, it's going to be electric. But more likely, you're going to be kind of borrowing a car, right, via this autonomous ride-sharing mode. There's also going to be all sorts of other vehicles. I'm working with a number of companies that are working on light, two-wheel, three-wheel, four-wheel vehicles for dense cities that are a lot more practical, right? You don't need a huge SUV to drive around the dense city. If you need to get from point A to point B, you need a single seater, even that will take you there safely, that you feel like you're in control of, etc. So that's my idea. One more thing on that. This should be mentioned, the VTOLs, right? The vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. They're a lot further away than most people realize. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of investment in that sector right now, but there's a lot of complexity with air traffic control and where they can fly and how they can fly and safety and the costs, of taking an expensive, a heavy battery up in the air. That energy cost is expensive right now. These things are going to be piloted for a long time before they're autonomous. So that's going to take a full decade to really get there, maybe more.
Future of media and journalism.
It's yeah, I mean, it's kind of a sad state of affairs, I would say. I think whereas before journalists were highly respected and their job was to ask tough questions, now all of that's gone away to punditry. In the US, I think a major problem area is cable news, because they're in the 24-hour, they need to fill 24 hours. They need to keep their audience. They're more in the entertainment business than they are in the news reporting business. So it's like, one news story that they will talk about ad nauseum and overanalyze forever, or they have some spin on it. It's not really reporting anymore on the factual basis. So I'm kind of sad to see that. Maybe we'll have some kind of a snap return to normalcy. I don't know. On the other hand, it's a lot easier for people talented people to kind of break through. And when they write things like essays, platforms like Medium and others have created a platform for people to be heard. And that's really cool that they stand out that way.
Two more questions, and the question is added on the future of, plus the role of Netflix, Apple TV, Pixar, Disney, you name it. Or
okay.
Education.
Future of education from the context of big streaming platforms. So the person that I would recommend on that topic is Scott Galloway. He's written about it. And I think there's actually a lot to be said for that. And I agree. Right now, the way universities, the top tier universities with the brands, the way they attract students is they have some star professors who teach, 40 or 50 or 100 students per term. And that's how they attract this quality and this crazy level of applications to try to get in front of them. And then you have a lot of mediocre teachers out there that just kind of go through the motions. What these technologies are allowing to be done is to basically democratize that information. So a star professor no longer is going to be teaching 40, 50, 100 students. They're going to be teaching 40, 50, 100,000 students. And they're going to get the benefit, the economic benefit of being a star teacher, just like a star musician or anything else. So that's really positive. And what Scott was talking about, and I tend to agree, but all credit to him for that idea, is that you're going to see big tech companies partner with educational brands. So Harvard and Google, MIT and Apple, etc., to offer programs to the masses. That may be part of the answer of how we get the mass population more interested and more qualified and learning more. So I think, I don't know about Netflix, maybe they'll get into that mode, but I think it's going to be more like the Googles, Apples as platforms. They've already been doing that. Google has Google Classroom that's used heavily. Both my kids are using that in schools. And then Apple has iTunes University. So they've already started on that several years ago, and you're going to see that become much more prevalent.
And the very last one, the future of companies like Ernst & Young, all these consulting companies.
I think they're I think they're going to be quite important. I think there's a book from one of my mentors as I was a teenager, Mike Malone. He used to be a writer. I think he's still a writer for Wall Street Journal. He wrote a book called The Future Arrived Yesterday, and he wrote that years ago. And he was talking about, I recommend reading it. I don't know, maybe it's a little out of date at this point, maybe it's an updated version. But he was talking about the protein corporation, meaning that the way businesses are going to work will be quite different. He predicted this, and he's quite right, where you have a certain core of people in the company that, across different sectors that, maybe 50 people. And then it's going to be surrounded by a bunch of contractors and individuals that kind of come in and out. And when you have, the big consulting shops, besides their kind of technical audits and all of that, but if they're on the consulting perspective, they can come in and out for specific projects as they do. And you're seeing that whole business grow because rather than having that function in-house, companies can go to these consulting shops and get access to the best thinking, to the most experienced frameworks, et cetera, and apply that to their businesses. So I think that's going to increase over time. And it makes sense. So one of the companies I'll tell you about working with Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, HTT, and they've actually been able to pull this model off. They were the first to incorporate after the white paper on Hyperloop was published by Elon Musk, the SpaceX engineers wrote. They incorporated something like 6 weeks later. They did a feasibility study, realized that technology that was proposed is not feasible. They need to kind of start the stack from scratch. And they decided to, instead of trying to build, they thought of this as much more of a new industry than just a new company. And they thought they couldn't do it alone in one organization. They would never be able to hire all the best people that they need to be able to do this. So what they did is they have the core team, even now, almost 7 years later, they're about 50 people. Around that, they have over 800 individual contributors and 42 companies in a consortium that all have equity in Hyperloop, in HTT, in exchange for their contributions of IP and the work that they've done to build that whole technology stack. So I think you're going to see increasingly more companies take that approach as they try to tackle bigger and bigger problems that are beyond, even the fastest growing company, right? So imagine with Hyperloop, what they needed to do is deal with propulsion, with vacuuming, with how are you going to build these tubes, the energy system, the security, the software stack for all of this. And they've been able to put that together with this group. And now they're going to be licensing that to governments who will build these Hyperloops as infrastructure. And they'll be advising on that. And then there'll be operators that run it. So, but they're giving them the entire stack of technology to be able to utilize. So I think you're going to see increasingly more of that in that context for these really big challenges.
I'm going to give you one bonus question, and then everyone else in the room, I know you're going to have all the really good questions to ask to Vitaly in 35 minutes, but no one's going to be on Zoom then. So maybe you can use the 3 minutes that I buy you now to phrase your question. But you raised that earlier, and also Martin it pointed that one, jobs that are going to be released. And we're going to look at massive unemployment. Businesses are going to disappear. Job descriptions are going to disappear. There are the idealistic predictors of way more jobs will come than we know today. World Economic Forum pointed that 65% of the jobs that are around in 2 years we don't know about today. So I know you're more a data guy than an opinion guy. You just have to do like this to prove this. What's your take? What's your point? What's your prediction? What's your feeling about that?
I'm much more of the thinking that something like 30% of the jobs will be eliminated, and maybe we'll replace, if we're lucky, half of those within that same period of time. I think I'll be proven right as we start seeing this recovery from COVID. You're going to start seeing that a lot of people don't get rehired. A lot of companies will figure out how to do the same business with a lot fewer people. It's going to be a massive reset. I'm a big fan of Andrew Yang's. He called it. He called it 100%. It just happened 10 years faster because of this emergency. So that's going to be rough for a lot of people. And we need to act very, very quickly to solve this problem the best we can. We're not going to solve it 100% because you can't retrain people overnight. You're not going to take people in their 40s and 50s that have a high school education or less and make them programmers. It's just not going to happen. With the best intentions, there are very few people in that category that will be able to sit down, that have the ability, the capability to sit down and study and pick up all the knowledge that they're missing to be commercially viable in these new careers that we're going to have. So, I understand kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The positive, kind of overly positive, optimistic perspective on this is like, hey, every other industrial revolution, we created all these jobs that didn't exist before. But yeah, that happened over 3 generations in each case. All of this is happening right now within 1 generation, within the millennial generation. We're halfway through it, and it's only going to get worse in the next decade. So you can't really compare.
And that's a generation that has 7 seconds of undivided attention span, as we learned 2 days ago.
Yeah, that's
yeah. I could do this for hours because you just pointed one. So I'm taking the advantage of being the host here in this group. The 3 skills that are really dyingly needed in 3 years from today.
Creativity, certainly, I think is going to be important. Technical skill, picking a certain direction that has a future, whether it be finance or engineering of some sort, and really becoming specialized there, because all of these fields are quite deep and it takes time to get good at anything. And the third is, I guess, just having confidence and a lot more people going out there and controlling their own destiny rather than waiting for something to happen to them.
What do you teach your kids?
I teach my kids to be creative, to more importantly be assertive, and really not be afraid of anything, and not think that they can't do anything. If somebody else can do it, they can do it as well.
Nice. I'm opening up. Martin, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I'm just not know where I should start again or come back. But I will be at the last question with the mass employment. Do you think, or what can be an answer of it? I mean, of course, if there are thousands and thousands of people don't have a job, what's then? So is basic income an answer for it, or?
Yes, I think I'm a fan of Keynesian economics, where you need to kind of turn the flywheel, right? So this idea that a lot of people think about, like, okay, if you give people money, you're just taking it out of the ones that paid the taxes and giving it to those that didn't contribute. That's not the case. Those that, let's say just US, right? Because I don't want to speak for everybody, but in the US, most of the economy is small businesses, right? And those small businesses they go around, they earn money and spend money based on a lot of consumer spending. So if you give money to people as a basic income, not enough for them to feel rich, but enough for them to survive, it takes off the pressure for them to be able to take care of the basics. And then this is where they can pick up new skills. So for example, one way I'd approach this, and I'm not a government person at all, but one way to approach this is to say, okay, you can get basic income as long as you're taking this certified course to increase your skills, right? And it has to be in a relevant area. It can't be, sorry to say, it can't be in like art history or music appreciation. It has to be in something vocational that has a future. And if they're saying, okay, I'm studying for the next 2 years to get an associate degree, or 4 years or whatever, at that point, you get the support, you get the structure to support you. This already happens in a lot of countries in Europe, let's say. I don't know to what degree everybody here understands how there's very big lack of social safety nets in the US. It really, if you're not working, you get unemployment for a little bit of time, and then you are in poverty, right? You're not gonna be able to pay rent. with any kind of food stamps program, which is not really cash, any of that, long term at any place that you'd want to live in the U.S. Right? Rent, I'm not even talking about Silicon Valley, where a 1-bedroom apartment rents at an average of like $3,500 a month. But anywhere in the U.S., this is a big problem. In Europe, there's a much better system in most places. So I would say that's probably part of the answer, is that you don't just do giveaways and just people are kind of on the border of poverty and they're okay and they're surviving. You give them a direction. You say, okay, there's a commitment mechanism. You want to get this? Well, the time that you have during the day, you need to commit towards bettering yourself, so you can hit escape velocity at some point and do better than minimum.
Mm-hmm.
One more question.
I want to ask about kids. I have 3 kids. Vitaly, how old are your kids?
9 and 12.
Sorry, you broke up.
9 and 12.
Oh, okay. Mine are the same age. So, and I guess we're, kids of the 80s, 90s or something, and we had computers, and maybe our parents kind of just like, oh, they're on the computers, leave them there, and like, oh, boom, it's like 4 a.m, and they kind of forgot about us. And how do you deal with your kids with this? Something's changed, and it's now there's insidious things, and the games are different, and you're not like dumped into a command line interface when you turn on your computer. So how do you drive this with your kids?
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. So first of all, I have a meeting at the top of the hour, so I'm a little time capped, Nikki, just FYI, but so we can get through everything. But really quickly, when I was growing up, one of the things that were formative for me, this was pre-World Wide Web. I ran bulletin board system on my home computer. I would turn off all the ringers in the house when my parents went to sleep. I would let others dial in and exchange files and whatever. And quite honestly, the content wasn't always age appropriate, let's say, when I was like 11, 12, 13 when I was doing this, but got through it. As far as the way I think about it with my kids these days is that I think the most important thing is you're not going to be able to block everything negative out there for your kids. It's just not possible, not practical. What you want to do is give them the skill sets to make their own right decisions. And that's what I emphasize on, to where they don't have all the kids have curiosity, but they're not like completely off the deep end. And then for me, this is totally personal, is that I try to limit kind of mindless consumption of bullshit content and try to make it at least educational. So if they're watching YouTube nonstop, then it's something practical like how-tos, or they're learning something. They get the same kind of emotional, hormonal hit of like sitting there and vegging out and watching a video, but that video is teaching them something rather than just like, unboxing videos of toys or something else that I feel is a waste of time.
Vitaly, thank you so much for this. As I said before in the beginning, there's a little surprise. So all of you will get the book from Vitaly. I'm going to logistics with you. I just need your addresses and it will be sent directly, but all of you will have his book. Thank you so much for taking time. I really enjoyed that conversation. I felt like it was, as I said, I could do this for hours.
You didn't allow a question from us because you had so much.
And
Nick, you're a great interviewer. You're one of the best interviewers. I got to tell you, you got all the right questions, and you lead a conversation very well. So thank you for that. Thanks for the invite. Nice to virtually meet everybody. Stay healthy and productive, and feel free to reach out in the future if you have some questions or if you want to talk about something in more depth.